You know those old Wild West shows we used to watch as kids? Cowboys and Indians, all those romanticized battles. Well, today we're going deep on someone who is more than just a character in a story. Sigel, the Lakota leader. His name's like synonymous with resistance, back when America was changing so much.
It's wild, isn't it? How his story is like right at that point where the traditional Lakota life just slams into this huge force of westward expansion.
Yeah, and you got some amazing sources here. They really give you a feel for that whole world. The cultures clashing, the spiritual stuff, and those battles that changed everything. What gets me is Sitting Bull, he wasn't born a legend, right? He had to earn it. Incredible feats, total conviction. Did you know he wasn't even born Sitting Bull?
Nope. 1831, he was born Jumping Badger. His dad was emerging. Returns again, a respected headman, a healer too. And his mom, her holy door, known for her wisdom and deep spiritual understanding.
Returns again. Okay, now that's a name that makes you want to know more. What's the deal with that?
Oh, he was fearless, a total warrior. Stories say during a raid, his buddies were ready to head back, but he was like, nah, I'm returning again, straight back into the fight. Bold move, right? Earned him the name.
Sounds like a guy who lived up to his name, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So how does Jumping Badger become the Sitting Bull we all know?
This is where it gets really interesting. Lakota culture, they were all about the spiritual, how it connected to nature. Jumping Badger's name change. It's got a talking buffalo, a campfire, and a dad with some serious intuition. So returns again and his crew are around this fire, right? Buffalo shows up, grunting, bellowing, the whole deal. Everyone's freaked out, except returns again. He gets what the buffalo's saying.
Wait, hold on. A talking buffalo? That's like straight out of a myth.
Right, but it shows you how the Lakota thought. Animals, especially buffalo, were messengers, from the spirit world. This buffalo returns again 4 names. Buffalo Bull sits down, Jumping Bull, Bull stands with Cal, and one bull. Like, sacred gifts, super meaningful.
So returns again, picks Sitting Bull for himself.
Yeah.
One of the buffalo names.
Exactly. And later, he gives that same name to his son, but not right away. Jumping Badger had to prove himself, be brave enough to carry his dad's name.
I'm picturing this young guy wants to live up to his dad's legacy, right?
Yeah.
So what was that moment, the one that changed his name?
14 years old, he does something that puts him right into that warrior world. Battle against the Crow. But he doesn't have a weapon. He's got a coup stick.
I've heard of counting coup, but I never really got what it meant. Explain it. Like, what did they actually do?
Oh, it was way more than just killing someone. It was about being brave, showing your skill right in the middle of the fight, touch an enemy with that stick, take his weapon, or even do something crazy brave right in front of him. That's what got you respect, honor. It meant you had courage, that you were willing to risk it all, way better than killing from afar.
So this kid charges into battle, crow warriors everywhere, and all he's got is this stick. That's some serious guts.
He knocks a Crow warrior right off his horse. His buddies finish the job. But that move, that willingness to put himself out there, that's what earned him his dad's name, Sitting Bull.
And that's how the legend starts. Young guy, courage, tradition, deep connection to the spiritual world. Man, I'm hooked already. I bet our listeners are too. Subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Sitting Bull's story. It's incredible.
Oh, we've just scratched the surface. This guy's journey, it shows you what the human spirit can do even when things get really tough.
And speaking of tough, Sitting Bull had to use those warrior skills more and more as things of the U.S. government got worse. But he wasn't just strong physically. He went to the spirit world for guidance, getting ready for the battles ahead.
Totally. And that brings us to something super interesting in Lakota culture. Medicine.
Not medicine like we think of it, right? Pills and stuff.
Nah, for them it was spiritual power, a connection to something sacred. It gave you special abilities, not potions or anything, more like inner strength, wisdom that came from the spirits.
And they believed Sitting Bull had this powerful medicine.
Oh, yeah. And one way he tried to make that connection stronger was this crazy ritual, the sun dance. Not for the weak, I'll tell you that.
The sun dance, man, it's always fascinated me. This intense thing, pushing your limits, all to connect with something bigger. You see that in so many cultures, religions, don't you think?
Absolutely. People want to connect with the divine, get guidance, strength from something higher. It's universal. The sun dance, it was a test, body and soul, a way for the Lakota to show their devotion, get visions from Wakantanka.
Paint us a picture. What was it actually like?
Imagine this. Circle of buffalo skulls, huge medicine pole in the middle, air is thick with burning sage, drums pounding. The dancers, they got skewers through their skin connected to that pole with ropes. They dance for hours, sometimes days. body swaying, faces up to the sun. All the while, they're blowing whistles, giving up their stuff as offering.
Intense. The pain, the stamina, the sheer willpower, it's hard to even imagine.
It was a test, inside and out. And Sitting Bull did this multiple times. Each time, more scars, and the Lakota believed more spiritual power.
So we've got Sitting Bull, brave warrior, spiritual leader, totally connected to his people's ways. But this was a time of huge change for the Lakota.
Yeah.
What was going on in the world that was threatening their whole way of life?
The biggest threat. White settlers moving in, that whole westward expansion push, railroads cutting through their hunting grounds, buffalo getting wiped out, and the U.S. government, they wanted to put them on reservations.
And that's where the trouble really starts brewing.
You got it. 1868, the U.S. signs a treaty with the Lakota, setting up the Great Sioux Reservation, supposed to cover a huge chunk of their land, present-day South Dakota.
But it wasn't exactly peace and harmony after that, right? I mean, it caused problems even within the Lakota.
Totally. They were divided on what to do about the treaty, and the pressure from the U.S. kept getting worse. Some leaders, like Red Cloud, a respected warrior and chief, he said, okay, we'll take the treaty, move to the reservation, figured it was the best way to survive against a powerful enemy.
Sounds like he was being practical. Knew things were changing and tried to make the best of it.
Red Cloud, he was all about being practical, even went to Washington, met with President Grant, spoke up for his people, pushed for peace.
But Sitting Bull wasn't buying it, was he? He was all about resistance, standing his ground.
Exactly. He saw that treaty as a betrayal, a way to steal their land and wreck their way of life, didn't trust the U.S. government one bit, called out Red Cloud for talking to the enemy, told his people, stay free, hold on to your traditions, your land.
I bet that message hit home for those who felt betrayed, especially the younger warriors. They wanted to protect what was theirs. But that kind of defiance, it had to lead to more conflict.
It did, and it put him on a collision course with one of the biggest names in American history, George Armstrong Custer. The stage was set for a showdown that changed everything. So we left off with Sitting Bull and Custer, heading for a clash. Custer's 1873 Yellowstone expedition, the whole point was to scout out a route for the Northern Pacific Railroad, right through Lakota territory.
Talk about poking the bear. Imagine a railroad just slicing through your hunting grounds. That had to feel like a direct attack.
Oh yeah, it was a huge problem. When Custer and his guys show up, Sitting Bull and his warriors, they're ready. They're shadowing the expedition, hit-and-run raids, harassing the soldiers, sending a message, like, we don't want your railroad here.
That must have really ticked Custer off. The guy was known for being aggressive, wanted those big wins.
You're right. Custer was itching for a fight, wanted to show everyone how good he was. But Sitting Bull, he was smart. Knew he had to choose his battles. He held back from a big confrontation then. Knew his people needed him to be strategic, pick the right time and place to fight.
So more like a strategic retreat for Sitting Bull, not a defeat. What happened with that Yellowstone expedition in the end?
Well, Sitting Bull's resistance, the rough terrain, they were running low on supplies too. It all forced Custer to give up on the survey and pull back. It was a setback for Custer and the government, their whole westward expansion thing.
Setback for Custer, maybe, but not the end. That clash on the Yellowstone probably just made him more determined to take the Lakota down. What happens next in this whole mess?
Things get worse. Gold is discovered in the Black Hills in 1874, and that really lights the fire. Custer leads another expedition into the Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, by the way, and his men find gold.
Oh, man. That's bad news, right? Especially since the 1868 treaty was supposed to keep white settlers out of the Black Hills.
Exactly. Total violation of the treaty. And word gets out about the gold. Fast. Prospectors come pouring into the Black Hills, all wanting to get rich quick.
The Lakota must have been furious. Betrayed. That was their sacred land, super important spiritually, and is being overrun by gold-hungry prospectors.
It was devastating. They saw it as a total disrespect for their sacred land, for the treaty, for everything.
What did the U.S. government do? Did they try to honor the treaty, protect the Lakota's land?
You know what they did? They tried to buy the Black Hills from the Lakota, like it was just some piece of land they could trade. They totally missed the point of Lakota culture and values.
Offering to buy land that was already theirs, and sacred on top of that. Wow.
Big mistake. In Lakota culture, land, especially the Black Hills, wasn't something you buy or sell. It was part of who they were, their connection to their ancestors, to nature.
So I'm guessing the Lakota weren't exactly lining up to sell.
Not a chance. Sitting Bull led the charge against the sale, said the Black Hills were not for sale no matter the price. He knew what was at stake. It wasn't just land, it was their whole way of life, their identity, their very soul as a people.
I can practically hear him saying, "You think we'd trade all that for some bacon, hardtack, and a little sugar and coffee?"
What did the government do when they realized their offer was a joke?
They got tough. December 1875, they issue an ultimatum. Basically, every Lakota not on the reservation by January 31st, 1876 is an enemy. We're coming after you.
Whoa, that's harsh. Middle of winter, not exactly the time to be moving entire communities. Sounds like they were trying to force a fight.
It's hard to see it any other way. They knew a lot of Lakota, especially those with the Sitting Bull, would never agree to that. It was the excuse they needed to launch a full-scale attack. Showdown time. The army's on the move, wants total control. And Sitting Bull's chosen defiance. He's not giving up his freedom, his people's way of life. What does Sitting Bull do with this crazy ultimatum?
He doesn't flinch. He rallies his people, gets ready for war. He knows he's outnumbered, but he's going to fight for his people's freedom, their land, their way of life, no matter what.
I bet the tension was through the roof as that deadline got closer. They knew a fight was coming.
It was a huge turning point. The army wanted to crush the resistance, force the Lakota onto reservations, and Sitting Bull and his people, they were fighting to survive.
And that brings us to Little Bighorn, one of the most famous and most controversial battles in American history. But before we get to the battle itself, I'm curious about those months leading up to it. What were the big decisions, the mistakes on both sides?
Those decisions, those mistakes, they had huge consequences. They shaped the battle and everything that came after.
And what about Sitting Bull in all this? I want to understand him, his motivations, what he was hoping for, what he was afraid of as this whole thing spiraled out of control. We'll get into all of that and more in the final part of our deep dive. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, so it's January 31st, 1876, the deadline. The army's coming, Sitting Bull's ready to fight. What happens?
3 columns of U.S. soldiers, thousands of them, marching right into Lakota territory. Their orders: crush any resistance, force everyone onto those reservations, no exceptions.
Can you imagine seeing this massive army heading your way? Must have been terrifying for the Lakota.
It was a show of force, for sure. But Sitting Bull, he wasn't backing down. He was smart, a brilliant strategist, and a real leader. Inspired his people, you know? Brave and that unshakable faith in the spirits.
So facing this massive threat, what did he do? Did he just charge headfirst into the army?
No way. That would have been suicide. He was smarter than them. He started gathering allies, different Lakota bands, even brought in Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors.
Wow, he got them all on the same side against a common enemy.
He was that good. It was more than just tribes, though. It was about that shared anger, broken treaties, stolen land, those sacred sites being violated. They were fighting for their way of life, their very survival.
So spring of 1876, Sitting Bull and his people, they set up this huge camp along the Little Bighorn River.
Thousands of them united against the government. It was a powerful statement, like, we're not giving in, a challenge to the army right there.
And then comes Custer and the 7th Cavalry.
Custer, he was ambitious, wanted glory, known for taking risks, sometimes reckless ones. He wanted this campaign to make him famous.
And that ambition is what brings him down in the end, right?
Yeah, he totally underestimated Sitting Bull's forces, how many there were, how strong they were. He wanted that big win so bad he split his regiment, attacked the Lakota camp before his reinforcements even got there.
Impatience, arrogance. They got the best of him. So what happens when his troops run into Sitting Bull's warriors?
It was a massacre. Custer rode right into an ambush. The Lakota, led by Crazy Horse, Gall, some of their best, they fought like demons. Fierce, smart, totally outmaneuvered Custer.
All those years of raiding, fighting, it paid off. They knew that land, how to fight as one, and they knew how to surprise their enemy.
Exactly. It was over quick, brutal. Custer and his entire detachment wiped out in a few hours. A huge victory for the Lakota, crushing defeat for the army. The whole nation was in shock.
Custer's last stand must have been all over the news. How did people react?
A lot of anger, demands for revenge. Newspapers called Sitting Bull and his people savages, murderers, the whole 9 yards.
But I bet some people, even with all that anger, they saw what the government had done. They understood the Lakota side.
You're right. Even with the tragedy, some people saw the injustice done to the Lakota, the broken treaties, the constant pressure on their land, their way of life. They got it.
So what about Sitting Bull? Big victory. Does he stick around?
He knew the army would be back with a vengeance. He took his people north into Canada.
And he stayed there for a while, right?
Yeah, but it was rough. Not enough food. And the Canadians, they were getting pressure from the U.S., didn't want to help too much.
So, tough choice. Stay in Canada with things looking bleak, or go back to the U.S., surrender.
Exactly. 1881, they're starving, hope's fading. Sitting Bull and his people cross back, surrender to the U.S.
Man, that must have been a blow. Giving up that fight for freedom, accepting life on a reservation.
It was a bitter pill, for sure. But Sitting Bull, he knew it was the only way to keep his people alive. He hoped maybe surrender would bring some peace, some security.
That shows a different side of him, doesn't it? The pragmatic side. Willing to make a tough call for the good of his people.
He was a complicated guy, warrior, spiritual leader, a politician even, and a pragmatist when he had to be. He kept fighting for his people, even after surrender. New challenges in a world changing fast.
It's a powerful story. A man who fought so hard for his people's freedom, but in the end, had to surrender. Makes you think about those clashing cultures, the broken promises, and how resilient people can be.
It's a story with twists and turns. It makes you think. It's not just heroes and villains, it's more than that. Sitting Bull, he makes us remember that history. It's not so simple.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about the power of Sitting Bull's story. He reminds us that history is made by people, making choices. Sometimes they're heroic, sometimes they break your heart. But they're always human. I hope everyone listening will keep learning about this incredible time in American history. There's so much to discover, so much to think about.